Hi everyone, in today's video I'm looking at section C of the political and social protest writing paper using Blake and A Doll's House in order to show you an example answer for a question that has already came up. It came up about 3 years ago, I think, from memory, and it's the question about contrasting worlds. Explore the significance of contrasting worlds in two texts that you have studied. And as you can see from my paragraph plan here, I aim to write about 2 paragraphs about Blake and 1 paragraph about A Doll's House. That's just one way you could do it. But I tend to focus on 3 paragraphs, usually maybe 2 paragraphs about one text and another about the second text. It doesn't have to be balanced. And on the bullet points down the right-hand side, you can see just the notes that I've taken in order to help prepare me for when I wrote this question a little earlier. In actual fact, in the first paragraph, I intend to talk about 2 poems, Laughing Song and The Echoing Green together, simply because of the question. Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to put the kind of the natural innocence poems together and then contrast it with my second paragraph about London, which depicts a very different kind of existence. So that's the reason why I've unusually in this question put 2 poems together in the same paragraph, because I thought that would just be easier to do in the time frame. So section C, 2 texts, answer the question, choose the right poems, and you don't have to compare the texts either, but yeah, that could be one essay structure. As is often the case with Lit B, particularly for section B and section C tasks like this, you don't have to write an introduction. So I'm just going to get straight into it, and I'm going to go straight into the first paragraph about the first 2 of Blake's poems. The significance of contrasting worlds can be seen when considering Blake's poetry. The whole collection represents 2 contrary states of the human soul, represented by innocence and experience, which depict differing realities for individuals. A world of freedom and utopia in innocence, with a world of suffering, poverty, and dystopia in experience. 2 poems in innocence which convey this is The Echoing Green and Laughing Song, both of which convey the equilibrium between nature and man. In the former, a village green represents a harmonious day where villagers enjoy a summer fete, where there is a strong sense of community cohesion between people and the green world. In the first stanza, the semantics to do with happiness, such as happy, welcome, and cheerful, reinforce this happy day, while in the second, the children are playing and old John is sitting under an oak tree, who seems to take enjoyment from seeing the children play, perhaps because it reminds him of his own innocence. In Laughing Song, consistent personification of the natural world depicts a cheerful scene with Mary and Susan and Emily in harmony with nature. The focus on singing and merry wit sets up a perfect contrast with the negativity seen in some of the experience poems, such as London. That links me nicely into my second paragraph, but it also, I hope, just kind of reinforces how both of these poems, The Echoing Green and Laughing Song, are very similar in the presentation of happiness, but also happiness outdoors in the pastoral world. And then we move into London. So we've got, in London, the speaker wanders around the city streets and witnesses a world of suffering and poverty which consumes and constrains all those who are in the city. In complete contrast to the rural world which has been presented in innocence, the language in London is bleak and repressive, such as the phrase marks of weakness, marks of woe. What is also noticeable is the repetition of the word every, which reinforces how the sense of misery and suffering affects everyone. In the second stanza, the anaphora in every becomes monotonous and really reinforces how bleak the existence of the citizens has become. Children are often used by Blake as devices to show the corruption of innocence and the impacts of suffering on those most vulnerable. In this poem, infants are crying with fear, and there is also a miserable depiction of the relationship between parent and child in the last stanza, seen when the speaker comments on how the harlot's curse blasts her newborn infant's tear, or baby's tears. London also presents mental constraint in these poems, whereas in these poems, people are depicted as being free in nature. In London, mind-forged manacles suggest people have psychological restrictions and foregrounds how these restrictions act as constraints and are endemic in a world of suffering. In this sense, these poems show how Blake's collection is very much concerned with contrasting different worlds, and a nice link back there to the question. So I think I missed a bit of it out there when I was reading it, but basically saying that whereas in the Echoing Green and Laughing Song, there's a degree of freedom in nature. In London, we have mind forged manacles, and the Thames is also charted as well, isn't it? So that could be something else you could add in too. But again, the contrasting world here is rural versus urban, or innocence versus experience, utopia versus dystopia, suffering versus happiness, etc. So clearly, getting at there the contrast in the worlds depicted. And then finally, we're going to be talking about A Doll's House from Ibsen to finish off this response, this example response. In Ibsen's A Doll's House, the contrasting worlds of men and women are represented through the symbols of marriage and money, both of which restrict Nora in some way and result in her democratically emancipating herself from the confines of the oppressive home, which does everything to show the facade of marriage but little to show the realities. By having Nora leave the home and by taking a loan out in secret, she not only rejects the financial rules of the time, which favoured husbands, but also shows a female character who is conflating two separate spheres relating to gender roles. By forging her father's signature to the loan and earning money in secret to make the repayments, Nora has signed herself into the masculine world of finance, business, and power, out of bounds to women, and the focus placed on them as being nurturers and housewives. The fact that Nora never ventures into Halma's office represents how this masculine world is out of bounds to her. In Act 1, when Halma sees the children, he coldly implies being in the house would be intolerable because he is not female or the mother. As Nora says to Mrs. Lynde, being afforded the freedom to work and earn her own money was almost like being a man. By leaving the house at the resolution of the play, represented by the final sound of the door slamming, she is also rejecting the institution of marriage and its entrapping force. In this sense, Ibsen examines the central conflict between his two protagonists, a conflict that is reinforced because Nora and Halma represent contrasting worlds in relation to marriage and money based on their biological sex and the roles that they have within their marriages. Okay, so that's an example of a Section C response using Blake and A Doll's House as the two texts. Notice that there's a slight imbalance. In fact, I talk more about Blake than the other text. That's absolutely fine. But there is clearly a focus here on the task, which is contrasting worlds. So I have, in fact, stayed kind of straight in a straight line. I haven't gone off on a tangent. No conclusion, no introduction, but that is what an example could look like for a Section C response. Okay, thank you very much for watching.